the focus now for the most of the pro-choice campaigns, and particularly today's march at 4 o'clock, is going to be calling for immediate emergency legislation for X. There will be a debate on it next week. Sinn Féin have tabled a private member's motion calling for legislation. It's not the Claire Daly's bill. It's just a motion that says we call for legislation, which is, I suppose, another interesting development in itself. But I don't know what I think that will put Labour in probably a bit of a difficult position, in that generally they will try and they when it comes to private members' business, what they'll do is they'll table an amendment, and I don't know what they're going to do with this. They know themselves that they have a responsibility to legislate. So I suppose where to from here? Myself and Goretti as well are involved in the beginnings, the kind of very early stages of organising a national campaign. It's quite clear from everything that's gone on with abortion rights in Ireland, all of the court cases, none of this has worked. Women have been hauled through the courts over and over and over again, and the government have just ignored Supreme Court decisions. They've just, it's not relevant to them. It's not, as Enda Kenny said a few weeks ago, legislating on this is not a political priority at the moment. They've ignored a European Court human rights judgment. Very, very unusual for a state to do that. And they don't care. It's quite clear now that people need to get mobilised. There needs to be a mass campaign. People need to be out in the streets. They need to be outside Leinster House, outside TD's constituency offices, in their faces, everywhere they go. People need to be shouting at them and saying, this cannot happen. We can't have any more martyrs for abortion law. Had Claire Daly's legislation been passed, there is a chance that Savita could still be alive today. And that is it. And anyone who disagrees with that is just out of their minds. And furthermore, TDs in Leinster House are out of their minds if they think that there are no more cases like this. So really, I suppose what I'd be calling on people to do is continue the mobilising. If you're not involved with pro-choice campaigning at the moment, please get involved. Call your local representatives. Harass them in their constituency clinics, ring their offices, email them, inconvenience them, because the anti-choice side have done this for so long. They go out there, and when it comes down to election campaigns, they threaten TDs where we're going to have billboards with your face on it, and I'm not really into that stuff, but a woman has died, and we've been saying for years that, we've had rape victims, women with suicide, or women who are suicidal, women with cancer, women with all sorts of different very, very extreme conditions. But we've been saying, someone will die eventually, and now it's come out publicly. They have, women have died before, and it's been pushed under the carpet. But really, we just ask people to come out and march today, and hopefully I'll see you all today at 4 o'clock at the Garden of Remembrance. Thanks.
Stephanie said, has covered most of the stuff from the south that I would have wanted to say, so I'll just leave it at that. But I wanted to say a bit about the north. The law in the north is very much the same as in the south in many ways, except that it's actually a little bit more liberal, because there's a thing called the Bourne Judgment, which applies in the north, which is that it's the same act, the 1861 Offence Against the Persons Act. The sanctions that women and doctors face are very much the same: life imprisonment if you self-induce an abortion. And of course, hundreds of women across Ireland, I'm saying hundreds of women every year, actually we're not quite sure, it's probably thousands of women every year, do self-induce abortions using abortion pills that they get over the internet. And all of those women are facing life imprisonment, both north and south. And our law has been, affected by this Bourne Judgment, which basically says that if a woman, if continuing a pregnancy would leave a woman, quote, a physical or mental wreck, unquote, that she has a right to an abortion. Now, actually, every single woman that I know who's had an abortion, they had an abortion because, they didn't want to continue the pregnancy, and they felt that there would be left a bit of a mental wreck. if they were forced to continue it. So, you know, that, as far as I'm concerned, really we should be able to have abortions when we need them in the north. As a result of that law. But of course the way it's being interpreted by the Assembly is, and actually this is why when I heard Stephanie saying that Sinn Féin has tabled an emergency motion calling for legislation, I went, huh? What's actually happened in the Assembly is that time and again, because the courts in the north have said, like the courts down here, you need to clarify the law, you need to make it clear when doctors can actually perform abortions. There were guidelines brought in, which I think is a bit like the statutory instrument you're talking about, kind of like regulations as to when doctors should be able to perform abortions. And in 2007, these guidelines were presented to the Assembly by the Ulster Unionist Michael McGimpsey. They did actually allow, basically they just explained what the law said, and they did point out in the middle of them to doctors that they had to make sure that these were legal abortions they were performing, because otherwise they actually said up to life imprisonment and the guidelines. So, you know, really way to make the doctors feel confident about giving any woman an abortion, you know, just to remind you doctors, you do face a lot of time in jail if you get it wrong. And those guidelines then, when they went to the Health Committee of the Assembly, Iris Robinson, I don't know if you remember that woman, who, that's my polite way of describing her. She's the one who said that homosexuality was an abomination, and then turned out to be having what I considered an abusive affair with a young teenage bloke who was very vulnerable because his father had just died. Well, she produced the response of the Catholic Guild of Lawyers to our guidelines. And now remember, this is a woman who's, you know, an evangelical Protestant. Produced the Catholic Guild of Lawyers guidelines and invited the committee to basically use those guidelines, that response from the Catholic Guild of Lawyers as its response to the guidelines that have been brought out. So a letter was sent from the Health Committee of Stormont, signed by all of the parties on that committee, in other words, including Sinn Féin, saying that the guidelines were wrong, that they should have started, that the very first thing it should have said was that abortion is illegal in Northern Ireland, and that anybody performing an abortion, you know, faced prison. And then you look at the very rare exceptions. That was what the letter said, and the letter is available on the Hansard on the website of the Assembly. So the law in the north, you know, should be quite permissive, but actually it operates exactly the same as down here. There were some 40 abortions carried out in Northern Ireland last year, and almost all of those will have been for because a woman's life was in danger rather than her health. You'd actually have to be very, very ill indeed to be able to get an abortion. And we're not really sure if a case like Savita's could happen in the north. I suspect actually probably not, but maybe if you were in the wrong hospital. And as I suspect she was in the wrong hospital. I mean, everybody who heard about her thought if she'd been in the Rotunda, she'd probably be alive today. And it's the same in the north. If you're west of the Ban, basically, just like probably if you're west of the Shannon here, it would be the same. Now, there have been, and oh yes, the other thing is that as a result of that guidance that was produced, one of the things that is said very clearly is that fetal abnormality is not a reason for abortion in Northern Ireland. So when you talk about the barbarity of what's happening down here, where women who are miscarrying, I said the Examiner yesterday, when women who are miscarrying are being told in some hospitals the safest thing for you to do is to get on a plane now and go to England, I just don't understand that, because you can be really, really ill if you're miscarrying. So why would you do that, right? But you know, when I saw that, I was actually then reminded that we'd been somebody put a thing up on the Facebook page of Alliance for Choice about a friend of hers who, because of fetal abnormality no longer being available in Northern Ireland, it used to be that you could get abortions for reasons of fetal abnormality in the north. What they're doing now in some hospitals in the north is they're sending women over to NHS hospitals. I mean, it's all been done on the NHS. They're sending them over to have the termination in Liverpool, meaning that the fetus is killed in Liverpool, and then they're put on the plane to come back to Ireland to have the delivery, to have the D&E, as they call it, the dilation and evacuation, when they get back. Yeah. and that they're actually like travelling. No, remember, these are wanted pregnancies, right? People who have abortions for reasons of fetal abnormality, usually they're quite far along. It's a tragedy for the couple because here they have a wanted child, they suddenly discover, is, going to be, not that they're not going to be able to continue the pregnancy, and particularly given the incredible lack of services that there are for people with disabilities in this society, and sent off like that. Absolutely disgraceful. And of course we have had 6 deaths from backstreet abortions in Northern Ireland since 1967. We don't know how many deaths we've had from backstreet abortions here in the south. Because when I say backstreet abortions, I actually mean attempts at self-induction. And in fact, in surveys that have been done with GPs and gynecologists in the north, 11% of GPs have said that they've seen the results of amateur abortions, of women, taking knitting needles and things like that to themselves. And I'm sure that happens in the south as well, and had happened in the south, particularly in the past. With the abortion pills available on the internet now, it's much, much safer, and illegal abortions tend to be safe abortions. But I'm quite sure that there have been women from here who've died as well. Not just in the south. The difference is that in the north, that these things are recorded. Okay, so north and south, really, I think we have the same problem, and the problem is that we have very cowardly politicians. And I mean, you can ask questions afterwards, but if you want more stuff about the law, but I think that it's fairly straightforward that we have the same problem on both sides of the border. So on the one hand, we have these very anti-abortion politicians, like I think a lot in Fine Gael are, a lot in Fianna Fáil are. I mean, Fianna Fáil may now be saying this is a disgrace, but of course they didn't. They never introduced anything. So on the one hand, you have these very anti-abortion politicians, and on the other hand, you have these politicians that manage to look both ways at the same time. What I've just heard about Sinn Féin is absolutely horrifying, because they've never brought in, do mind a private member's bill, they could bring in a government member's bill, a government bill in the north, to make it clear when abortion should be available there. And not only have they not done that, but they've run away from it in the north. And then down here, they're turning around and saying something different. And Richard Boyd Barrett was saying last night, the Labour Party seems to do the same thing. I heard of Anna Batchik on the radio, giving out to some poor Fianna Fáiler about why he didn't vote for Claire Daly's bill. And I was thinking, but you didn't vote for Claire Daly's bill. And that thing of, looking both ways at once seems to be a feature of political life, both north and south. And the question then really is, what can we do about it? And you see, I've been sort of thinking about this an awful lot over the last wee while, and it seems to me that there's a real gathering momentum, both north and south, in terms of people wanting to get on the streets, people wanting to be active in a pro-choice movement, and in a way we don't have anything very much to get them active in. There's a bit of an argument going on in the north, to be honest with you, about this, about what should Alliance for Choice be doing. Should it be getting lots of action groups set up? Should it actually be trying to have, instead of the situation at the minute where you have a small few people who really make the decisions and decide whether something should be called or not, should we actually be trying to have something much more mass? And I really do think that what we need both north and south, but I think you've kind of got the basis for it here in the south already, is some kind of effective mass movement. And what Stephanie was talking about, the pro-choice network meeting that there was recently, was a start to that. But of course the problem was we thought it was a long-term project. We thought it was something that we would start now, and like after Christmas something else would happen, and by Easter, maybe we'd have a network set up. But of course, because of Savita Panavar's death, we now actually are in a very different situation, and there's a very urgent need to have that mass movement now. Not to have it after Christmas, but to have it now. And so I really think that what we need to be seeing over the next wee while, and I don't know if it can be done, because we think today is going to be very big, so I'm not sure that today would be the place to be actually announcing it, except to say to people to keep an eye out for it. But I think we need to go back to what happened with the anti-amendment campaign in 1983, which is the closest thing to a mass movement for, it wasn't really for choice, but for at least for some kind of abortion rights that we had in Ireland. So how did we go about doing that back in 1981, actually? And I see there's quite a few people in the room of a certain age who were there at the time. Yes, hello Caroline. She was Waterford. So I can see, besides Dublin and Waterford and Donegal, I don't see anybody from Cork, but there was people in Cork. So, oh, sorry, Joe, Cork. I don't remember you from the anti-amendment campaign. You were, sorry. Oh, you had hair then, that's what it was. Yes. Anyway, and when I look around and I see the ones from Dublin, I can see people from the Dublin 8 group, from the Dublin 4 group. I can't remember the North Central group. And the thing was what was great about the anti-amendment campaign was the first meeting that set it up, which was in the Clarence Hotel. I think there was about 300 people at that meeting, 200 or 300 people at that meeting. And at that meeting, we were able to, and I think that's really what's needed, like literally before the end of November, in the next 10 days, say. We need to be organising a meeting in a room much bigger than this, where you can get all kinds of ideas being thrown up. Not a meeting where you have loads of speakers and very little time for discussion, but something much more like, a participatory assembly, something like that. Something where everybody gets to throw in their ideas. Because let's be honest, right? There's a huge diversity of ideas out there, a huge diversity of different types of people out there. I'll give you an example. Yesterday in Derry, we for Savita. Now, it's a nighttime one with candles and everything. It's fairly obvious what you do. And that helps because having the candles and everything helps because obviously somebody's died. You're not going to have a protest like you'd normally have with chants and things. You want to be respectful and, and show that we're in mourning and all that. How do you do that in the middle of the day? Well, we have all these arty types in Derry, and as soon as we arrived to Guildhall Square to where it was, there they had all this white, because white is the colour of Hindu mourning, and they had wrapped all the trees in white, and they've got white flowers, made flowers, like not real ones, for everybody to hold, and it was absolutely brilliant. Now, to be perfectly honest with you, the politicos wouldn't have known how to go about doing that, but the arty types just, had it done almost without even thinking, and that's why we need that kind of diversity and actually deciding sort of what happens. I know you want me to shut up, but also what we did with the Alliance for, with the anti-amendment campaign was that, and I'm going to sit down and shut up now, is that at that meeting in the Clarence we had tables all around the room with people behind them, and there was little signs up saying Rathmines, Rialto, Tala, North Side, poor old North Side just got the one. I'm sure these days there'd be more tables for the North Side. And people went to those tables, and there was 20 or 30 people for Rialto, and 20 or 30 people for Rathmines, and 20 or 30 people for Tala. And you had action groups set up in all of those places. And so that the next time, and all of those action groups were to go off, harass their TDs, canvass their areas, hold protests in their local areas, but also build for continuing large-scale protests, and also, and very crucially, encourage the rest of the country to also set up such action groups. I've said last night, I'm corresponding with a woman on Facebook who lives in Tralee, who very much wants to set up a pro-choice group in Tralee. There's women like this all over the place, and men like this all over the place, who really want to get active. And I think that if we're serious about changing the laws in Ireland, North and South, and I think at the moment, if you change it in the south, it'll really help us in the north. It'll really help force Sinn Féin in particular to get the finger out in the north. Then I think that we are going to have to really encourage that kind of a campaign to get going. And hopefully from the march today, where everybody expects that there'll be thousands, that we can maybe make a start. I don't know who to talk to. I'll talk to Stephanie later. But I really do think that we need to be getting that kind of a campaign going, so that there's a mass campaign right across the island that's saying, for too long now women's lives have been put in danger, and it's actually time that we have the right to choose. It's actually time that it's the women themselves who make the choices about what's going to happen in their lives. Thanks.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, I just have a couple of points. There's been a fantastic amount of suggestions, and it's great to see that there's such a huge amount of energy and interest in this now. And I know I'll certainly take back all of the suggestions that have been put forward to, whatever kind of group comes of the stuff that myself and Goretti are involved in at the moment. Just to come back to some of the things that some of the people said from the floor. I think it was Guy Joe, was it, from Cork, had asked that, did we know the numbers of women who had these, life-threatening conditions? And one of the things in the ABC case was the Attorney General was asked that question specifically, and he had to turn around and say he didn't know, because there's this issue of what could only kind of be looked at as linguistic acrobatics when it comes to abortion, and how the anti-choice side framed the argument, because to get out of the tight spot of not wanting to admit that they'd quite happily let women die, they say, oh no, those are not abortions, they're medical interventions to save the life of the woman, and that's somehow different. And I wouldn't be one really for recommending people read Fintan O'Toole, but he had a very, very interesting piece in, I shouldn't have said that, he had a very, very interesting piece in the Irish Times, I think it was this morning. It's basically, when is an abortion not an abortion, and that kind of, the language they use is very, very important to watch it. I think it was Melissa made a point as well around how this about opening the door that little bit, and that's what the anti-choice side are so afraid of. That's why they're so hell-bent on, just stopping any kind of little bit of progress at all. And the thing about the X case decision is, while it is very clear that it would only allow abortion in a case where there's a risk to the life, medical practitioners will have to be let have a certain amount of latitude as to how that's interpreted, because the problem with when you're talking about a risk to a woman's life is then you get into how much of a risk to your life does there have to be. Do you have to have a 10% chance of dying? Do you have to be a 90% chance? And then it's well, that's actually just, it's a risk to your health, and it's broader. Now, had you had a different, more progressive Supreme Court in 1992, we could be looking at a different type of legislation. But, unfortunately we didn't. But it is something that's going to develop, because they have to do something on it now. Just to address the point that Eamon made about, the formula or what they'll do, I think they are going to try and go down that statutory instrument road. And, James Harley will get up and he'll say, here you go, these are the regulations. Statutory instrument is what they call secondary legislation. The thing about that is there's a Supreme Court decision in a case, I think it was called City Press, and basically what the Supreme Court said, that a statutory instrument is worth sweet FA unless you have primary legislation to back it up. So, they might introduce a statutory instrument as a way of kind of trying to get the dust to settle and say, right, this is it, and then kick it down the road further. But at some point, they're going to have to come back to it. So, that's it.
A couple of things. First of all, just the point that Martin asked about whether putting the amendment into the Constitution that the anti-abortion people shot themselves in the foot. No, actually they managed to create an atmosphere in Ireland where, you have to remember, between 1983 and 1992, they were able to do things like bring in a law that said that, or not bring in a law, but actually have judgments that said that providing information about abortion was illegal. You had books being taken off the shelves in Dublin City Library. Even the bloody Yellow Pages was taken off. They were stopping. The Guardian was seized at the airport one day because it had an article about abortion in it. That's what they did when they brought that amendment into the Constitution. What made the difference was Miss X. The difference with Miss X was that there was a human face, just like with Savita Halappanavar. When the minute you put a human face on abortion, everything changes, because all of a sudden it's not an abstract idea. All of a sudden it's your sister, it's your mother, it's your daughter, it's your niece, it's your friend. And the minute that you put that human face on them, then nobody can say, no, we don't care what happens to you, because they do care what happens their friends and their sisters, etc. So actually what's crucial is actually us putting that human face on the issue of abortion. And from that point of view, I think it's really, really important that we ensure that after today, that the demand is not just for legislation on the X case, that the demand is for a new abortion law. Yes, we need immediate legislation on the X case, emergency legislation, and we need that in the Dáil next week. But more than that, because Stephanie's absolutely right, no doctor can say when a woman's life is at substantial risk. The only way they can be sure that a woman's life is at substantial risk is when she's dead. Yes, I was right, it was substantial risk. She's dead, that proves it. That's not good enough. We need to be sort of saying it's a woman's right to choose. Absolutely what Sinead said about the atmosphere having changed. I was looking at, in 2004, the Crisis Pregnancy Agency did a survey that showed that between 80 and 90% of of 18 to 45-year-olds supported abortion under quite liberal circumstances, and 51% supported a woman's right to choose under any circumstances. Now, that was 2004. We got on a taxi on the way in here today. We said to him, is there any news this morning? He said, no, it's all only about that poor woman in Galway. It's a disgrace, isn't it? I mean, it should be a woman's choice. Because we were starting doing the, yes, it was awful. And she goes, it's a woman's choice, that's it. And this man was, was older than me. So, there's a real pro-choice feeling out there. And I think it's time we we really have to take that feeling and actually channel it into action. And from that point of view, Stephanie, I don't know, we need to, you, me and Sinead need to have a quick caucus, I think, after this, because actually I think we need to get on to the Pro-Choice Network today and say, I think Willie is absolutely right. We should have clipboards with sign-up sheets on it today on the march, because otherwise what's going to happen, all those people who come along today and want to get involved, are we going to say to them, well, look up the website in 2 or 3 weeks' time, we might have something organised then? That would be to absolutely fail Savita Halappanavar. I think that if we don't, as a result of her death, if we don't actually turn things around completely in Ireland, north and south actually, and really start getting the kind of movement, give a vehicle to all of those women and men across the country who are absolutely disgusted. Give them the vehicle now, today, that says, here's how you get involved, here's how you change this awful country that allows women like her to die, rather than stand up to their ridiculous theology. And I'm going to absolutely shut up on this, and to shut up on it, I'm going to talk about the class issue, because really, thanks Joe Moore, I had actually forgotten to point out that the women who have the illegal abortions using the safe pills from the internet are overwhelmingly working class women who can't afford to travel. And the immigrant women, and actually I'll tell you a story in the north afterwards, because the UK Border Agency will actually turn a blind eye to those women if we actually go and tell them. And, it just shows you how people seem to be a bit kinder, and maybe that's something that we can look at for here. But and this brings back to what Marnie was saying about next Saturday. Because, you see, I think we have two opportunities. We have today to start signing people up, and we must have all those sign-up sheets there today. We also have next Saturday. On the 20th of October in Belfast, we had a pro-choice contingent. It was the 2 days after the Mary Stopes Clinic opened. There was real opposition within the pro-choice movement to having any kind of protest to welcome the Mary Stopes Clinic. And we suggested a pro-choice contingent on the ICTU march against austerity on the 20th of October. It was brilliant. It was the liveliest contingent on the march. There's a very clear link. A woman's right to choose, as Mary said, means having the right to choose to have a child, and that choice has been taken away from so many women. All of the abortion clinics are saying that the main reason that women are now coming from across these islands to have abortions is because they can't afford to have a child or to have another child. No woman should be forced into having an abortion because she can't afford to have a child that she might want to have otherwise. So the two things are utterly, utterly linked. And I think that also next week we should by next week we should know when we're going to have the first kind of mass meeting, whatever you want to call it, assembly, whatever you want to call it, to really get that campaign actually moving. So today we sign them up, assuming we can get people to agree to this, with clipboards and stuff, and then next week we have a leaflet, a pro-choice contingent on the march, and also a leaflet from whatever the campaign, pro-choice campaign, which something we call pro-choice network.
Irish Choice Network.
Irish Choice Network. Have a leaflet from that sort of saying, come along the following Tuesday or Wednesday to wherever the thing is, and actually let's get this thing moving. And this time next year we'll be coming back here to say, well, the referendum to get rid of the 8th Amendment from the Constitution, so as we can bring in a law that says it's a woman's right to choose, that's going to be the next campaign.